This is a story of Britain, but Britain as we very rarely see her, from above. If you really want to understand how our country works, then this is one way to get the big picture. We're going to go on quite a journey, up and down this crowded, busy little island and back in time tens and thousands of years to reveal the habits, the rhythms, the little secrets uncovered when you're able to look down. Surrounded by hang gliders. It's astonishing. It's like swimming through a shoal of fish at the moment. In this first episode, we're going to explore one day in the life of the British. We're going to reveal the great migrations we make across the country. Using data from satellites, we'll peel back the never-ending ballet of ships, planes, lorries and trains that keep us fed and working. We're going to see how we live on the very lip of chaos and yet mostly keep our balance. And we're going to expose the vast networks of power, water, phones and money normally hidden from view. And we're going to meet the people who spend their lives in the air to keep everything just about working back down on the ground. This is Britain from above. This is a story of Britain, but Britain as we very rarely see her, from above. If you want to understand how Britain works as an island, as a collection of millions of people, then there's only one way to get the really big picture: from the air. We'll be flying, hovering, floating, sometimes plummeting the length and breadth of this country and going back tens and thousands of years in time, to reveal the secrets, the rhythms, the patterns only properly uncovered when you look down. In this second episode, we'll discover how some of the greenest and most natural-looking landscapes on these islands have in fact been shaped and moulded by human hands over the centuries. From the scars of ancient settlements to suburban splatter and sprawl. From farming with oxen to farming by satellite. We'll reveal the battle between the town and the country and ask what we want from our green and pleasant land today. Whether it's keeping the countryside unspoilt or building new homes. Using our national parks as a playground or as a test bed for British industry's latest and fastest technology. This is Britain from above. East Anglia from 10,000 feet up. Fluffy little clouds, the familiar patchwork quilt of fields below. What could possibly be more reassuringly British? But I'm about to see it from a totally different perspective. Strapped to the front of skydiver Jason Thompson.
Absolute
was amazing. That was entirely amazing. This is sensational. What I can see below me is some of the most wealthy and productive agricultural land in Britain. And it is about as natural a landscape as Birmingham. Everything here is man-made. Only a few ripples of original river and stream to break the way the fields are laid out.
Almost everything below us in the landscape is being used to feed us. I can see hundreds of tiny pigsties, rows of high-tech sheds housing some of the 28 million chickens, turkeys, ducks and geese produced here every year. And field after field of wheat and barley, a quarter of Britain's entire national crop. It may be East Anglia, but it's our Midwest, a giant open-air factory. And we've inspected a lot of it in just 10 minutes. Not many factory inspectors get to have this much fun.
Fantastic! That was just sensational. Well done. Thank you very much indeed. Right at the beginning, you're just going like a shell or a bullet. You're just, that's fantastic speed.
It is immense.
What sort of speed are we doing there?
Immediately we leave the door, 60 feet in 1 second.
60 foot a second.
Yeah.
That is fast.
Very fast.
And then suddenly, when the parachute opens, you're a feather.
Exactly.
From shell to feather in one easy movement. Yeah.
It changes to 1,000 feet per minute then.
Yeah.
It's nice when the parachute opens though, isn't it?
Yeah. No, it was a relief. I was pleased.
Yes.
I thought, oh, that's all right.
These open-air food factories need the most modern technology to squeeze the best out of them, but the sheer size of the fields can cause a problem. Most farmers only ever get to see their land from this perspective, ground level, unless they've got one of these. This tiny aircraft, 4 feet long, isn't a toy. It's an unmanned aerial vehicle, or UAV. You've probably heard of these little spy planes being used by the military to take reconnaissance photos in Iraq or Afghanistan, so what is he doing on a farm in deepest Sussex? Farmer and UAV enthusiast Dewar Donithorne Tate is pioneering this aircraft called CropCam.
As Ken launches the aircraft, you'll see it fly to its first waypoint and then start doing its mission.
CropCam flies a pre-planned route over the farmland, taking photos with a diddly digital camera all the way. The flight itself is entirely computer controlled. All Dewar has to do is to wait while his spy plane rapidly builds up a picture of the land below.
One of the principal applications is called precision agriculture. Now, in the course of the last year, we've seen some fertilisers go for, say, £34 a tonne, to this year, £130 a tonne. So one of the purposes of this is to overfly your crop and see which bit of your land is productive and needs less fertiliser, and where you need to add more fertiliser, saving you money. So really it's to optimise the use of land. And I think a lot of farmers will be interested in that, especially big farmers, you know, places like Norfolk where they've got thousands of acres.
But some farmers are using technology that flies just a little bit higher than 200 feet. They're turning to satellites. 12,500 miles up in space.
The very strange thing about this is like sitting in, I don't know, the control room of an ocean liner. You're so high above everything.
Here on Simmons Farm in Suffolk, they're beginning the first harvest of the summer, and farmer George Gittus, an optimistic man, has handed over this beast of a combine harvester to me. What am I harvesting?
You're harvesting winter barley, which can either go into malting barley for beer, Maltesers, anything with malt in it, if you look on the back of your packet.
Yes, all right, there's something fishy here. Of course I don't know how to drive a combine harvester. I certainly couldn't steer one this accurately. This is the latest in British farming technology. Machinery that drives itself. Now, how is it that this is perfectly aligned to the edge of the barley that you're trying to cut?
What this machine now has is GPS, so now you can get right down to within 2.5 centimetres an inch accuracy.
So clearly I'm not steering, you're not steering.
No.
The steering is being done by satellite.
Yes.
That's amazing. This isn't your common or garden sat-nav, the kind that sends hapless motorists down dead ends or tells them to take a left straight off a bridge. The receivers on this machine are much more accurate, and so it's not surprising that this kind of space-age technology doesn't come cheap. So this piece of kit, £400,000 or thereabouts.
Yep.
How much difference does it make to your profitability to have something like this and the satellite tracking and all the rest of it?
An increasing amount.
How much more can a machine like this achieve than an old-fashioned guy in a combine harvester?
Well, we used to run 3 machines, and now we run this one machine to do the same amount of work.
And when you've got the right conditions, when the rain's held off and it's the right moment, how long do you drive a machine like this for?
Well, can be round the clock, can be 24 hours a day.
Right the way through the night as well?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
High-tech farming and 24-hour working have helped transform the landscape. Less romantic oil painting than a kind of fresh air science park. In fact, all over Britain, you can find countryside being moulded and mechanised at an industrial scale. Intensively harvested, man-made forests. Open-cast gold mines in Omagh, Northern Ireland, and vast reservoirs that have flooded the ancient valleys of the Lake District. Often the beauty of the British landscape really comes from the way that it's been shaped and changed by us. And although this might seem at odds with the typical rural idyll of unspoilt nature, babbling brooks or the sound of the nightingale, in fact, a bit of a shock for those of us who thought of the British countryside as natural, this country has been man-made, not natural, for over 6,000 years. At the end of the last ice age, almost everywhere in Britain was covered in woodland. This was the great wildwood, an almost unbroken canopy of trees stretching right across the land. At times, this forest of limes, oaks and yews would have been so dense that a red squirrel could probably have travelled from the south coast of England to the north coast of Scotland without touching the ground. Wildwoods covered Britain until about 4000 BC, but things were about to change. As our population grew in size and became more organised, our Neolithic ancestors cut down the forest and created settlements in the clearings, and a new Britain started to emerge, carved, moulded out of the landscape. Thousands of years later, you can still find some of the brooding, mysterious monuments left by our ancestors. Neolithic tombs or barrows filled with stone chambers to bury the dead. Roman roads to move great armies, posh villas for wealthy Romano-British landed gentry, enormous Celtic earthworks built to defend against marauding Saxons, and other sites whose original purpose we can only guess at. Silbury Hill is a man-made mound of chalk. Once it would have risen bright white out of the forest 5,000 years ago. What were our ancestors up to, we have absolutely no idea. Or there's the famous stone circle at Avebury, another Neolithic structure, just as striking, just as mysterious. But not all the traces of Britain's history are as well preserved or as obvious as these sites. Damien Grady is an aerial archaeologist for English heritage, and he can see things in the landscape that you or I would never notice. Mysterious reminders of the silent rubble of the ages buried all around us.
What a perfect day for this.
That's lovely, isn't it?
Absolutely beautiful.
What we're hunting for are crop marks. Thousands of years of farming have flattened many of our ancestors' structures, but the remains still lie buried under the soil and affect the way the crops grow. In certain lights and at different times of the year, they suddenly appear, like a fading X-ray of what was once there. This faint diagonal streak is a crop mark, difficult to spot and even harder to explain. All that remains of the Neolithic settlement on Windmill Hill, crop marks. So Damien's got his work cut out.
So I'll try and describe what I can see. It's quite difficult because the grass has just been cut. So you can see two large mounds
Yes.
in the centre. They're later period, probably Bronze Age. You see the way the grass has been cut in a curving pattern?
Yes.
We can just about see one ditch.
Oh, I see the ditch,
now.
yes, I can see the ditch.
Okay, there's three. There's a small enclosure in the centre between us and the barrows.
Yep.
And then there's another smaller ditch.
Yes.
Nearly 6,000 years ago, there would have been a wooden encampment on this hill, huts, market stalls, places for our Neolithic ancestors to get some rest, hang around, drink a few meads, and then head off hunting and gathering again. It seems that nearly every line or impression you can read from the air is another scratch or letter in the story of how we've moulded the British landscape. And amazingly, Damien is able to decipher the code, whether the site's 6,000 or even 600 years old.
Now you see this farm?
Yeah.
Between us and the farm in the pasture field,
Yes.
there's some ridge and furrow. That's a form of medieval ploughing. The plough would have been pulled by oxen and it creates this like corrugated iron effect across the landscape.
Yes. You see a shape underneath modern agriculture, a square, and you say that's a Bronze Age field or a Neolithic field, and that's an early medieval field. How can you possibly know what's what?
When it comes to fields, we can't be that certain, to be perfectly honest. When it comes to ritual monuments like round barrows, henges, that sort of thing, we have a better idea.
So the landscape, it's really like a piece of paper that's constantly written
That's
on
right.
and then partially scrubbed out and something else is put on top, and that's in turn partially rubbed
That's
out
right,
and
yeah,
layer
yeah.
after layer.
And it takes a long while to untangle it all.
Crop marks, of course, can only reveal the secrets of open countryside, where the landscape and the fields are exposed. In woodland, there's a specific problem: trees. This is Savernake Forest near Swindon. Deep inside the densely packed trees and undergrowth, you wouldn't think there were ancient archaeological sites. hidden beneath your feet. But Simon Crutchley from English Heritage and Peter Crowe of the Forestry Commission are absolutely sure they're taking me to an Iron Age temple.
So we are standing at the moment inside a pre-Roman temple.
Yes.
This is not getting any clearer, I have to tell you.
It does just through here, I assure you.
It's a kind of Indiana Jones moment. Well, yes. A boring Indiana Jones moment.
Coming here in slightly better conditions, but here I hope you can see we're now standing on the corner,
right,
with the bank running around here,
yes,
and heading off down there. And then if I step down into the ditch,
we're in the ditch. Now you say it, yeah,
you can see it.
Okay, I can see it, sort of. But it's kind of obvious why for 2,000 years nobody's noticed.
Indeed, yes.
I have to say as well, map it for us.
And it is an odd experience to step on a piece of history that's not been touched for centuries or even millennia. But what's even more surprising is how Peter and Simon discovered this temple, snoring quietly in the bushes. How did they find it? Archaeology is usually the stuff of spades, brushes and plumb lines, but this team discovered the site using an extraordinary piece of 21st century technology. Laser beams and computers, which have allowed them to look through the trees and the undergrowth below. Cambridge University's Bernard Devereux is the man behind the technology known as LiDAR.
And the LiDAR machine is doing what exactly?
The LiDAR machine is firing a laser beam at the ground. It's scanning the ground. It's firing this thing 33,000 times a second.
30,000 times a second?
Yeah. Scanning back in two. And each laser pulse is hitting the ground, reflected back and being recorded.
And that gives you a way of kind of skimming off layers and layers of the surface.
That's right.
You can remove the trees, you can remove the brambles.
We can remove the trees, the brambles, the nettles, and we can look at the shape of the ground underneath.
Fantastic.
The millions of laser readings from the LiDAR are fed into a computer, crunched up and spat out until they produce a high-resolution model of the landscape which looks like this. Different colours represent the heights of the trees and vegetation, red being the tallest. And then LiDAR can simply strip away the colours, just like taking a scalpel to the landscape, until all you're left with is the ground itself. Amazingly, this is the Iron Age temple that I was shown earlier. And they tell me that's the corner where I was standing. LiDAR isn't just helping archaeologists investigating Savernake Forest. Some 12% of Britain is covered by woods and trees, and both English Heritage and the Forestry Commission are poised to survey many more forests, hoping to discover other parts of ancient Britain that nobody even knew existed. Whether you're an aerial archaeologist, a LiDAR expert, or simply looking down on Britain on the way back from a trip abroad, our landscape is dotted with traces of what our ancestors did after they chopped down the wild wood. But as you fly over the British countryside, what of course you keep seeing is that patchwork quilt of different coloured, squarish fields. It's very familiar, but it's certainly not traditional. They're only a few hundred years old. This, by contrast, is Chelmorton in the Peak District, a rare collection of British fields without the patchwork quilt. In the Middle Ages, nearly all of us grew food and kept livestock in long, narrow strips like these. It was the nearest the medieval peasant came to socialism. Every villager had their own set of strips and everybody worked together. Chelmorton is rather more unusual because these strips were walled. but that's perhaps why the ancient field system has survived here. From around the start of the 18th century, strip farming was wiped out in a brutal process called enclosure. New laws allowed a whole class of rich landowners to tear up the strips and make larger fields for their use only. So much for the communal activity of centuries. Yet the larger enclosed fields formed the familiar quilt that's come to symbolise our modern landscape. And there was another hugely significant change to the way it looked: machinery. It's always dangerous to say one person started a revolution, but if there was one person who gave Britain the characteristic patchwork of fields, it's Jethro Tull, an ingenious, if slightly strangely named old chap who invented the seed drill, a machine which simply allowed a man and a horse to plant very fast, very regularly, over large areas. And from the seed drill develops everything we think of as mechanised farming, all the machines, all the tractors, right up to our satellite-guided combine harvester. People complain about industrial farming, but it made this country a lot richer. So it was sort of appropriate that Jethro Tull had his great idea here at Prosperous Farm. And with food prices and farming land now soaring in value, machinery and industrial farming may well make some of today's farmers prosperous beyond Jethro Tull's wildest dreams. But we don't like to think of our countryside as a money-making, mechanised production line. We prefer the illusion that it's cuddly and cosseting. We like to snuggle up under that patchwork quilt. We British have always had a strange attitude to the countryside. Sometimes it seems mildly kinky.